All right, temperature pressure relief valves. I was asked to, come up with a little thing that I could talk about. I get about 15 minutes or so. I don't think I can stress the importance of the TPR valve when it comes to the plumbing system. In my opinion, it's the most important part of the plumbing system. Usually, if you hear where one of these things has failed, you'll read an article about it, and it'll often say things like a tank was found, a block away, all these different things, because they're essentially rocketing when this thing doesn't relieve properly. These tanks are rocketing through the sides of buildings, through roofs, and so forth. And a lot of times when I put together a presentation, I do a lot of research and I read old articles and things like that. And I see that. I see these articles. So again, really catastrophic failures when they fail. All right, the ones that you're looking at right now, the little blue arrow shows you where the pressure activates the TPR valve. It's in the round opening around that white shaft that you see there. The white part is called the thermostat, and the thermostat reacts to temperature. The opening around it reacts to pressure. TPR valves are pretty simple. The ones that we generally use are going to be 210 degrees Fahrenheit is going to cause them to relieve. 150 psi will cause them to relieve. And what happens is when it reaches this, it blows off. It releases. Hopefully it releases to a safe location. Water then comes into the tank, kind of cools the tank down. The pressure, of course, drops as soon as it relieves. And if you don't correct the problem, hopefully we'll do it again. It'll continue to do that. I've seen them relieve so many times. I had one that relieved so many times in a crawl space. Every time it would relieve, there would be a certain amount of steam would hit the crawl space, and they ended up having $30,000 worth of structural damage. Now, one of the rules for TPR valves is they should be discharging in a location that's readily observable. You need to be able to see this when it's happening. I understand why that particular one was relieving in a crawl space. It was a house on the beach. You could walk around under it. It was that high, but it was blocked in, and so the steam didn't just blow away, and it soaked everything under there. And like I said, about $30,000 worth of damage. If you look at these names here, you see a lot of young people here, children, first graders, third graders, something like that, except down at the bottom. A TPR valve failed to relieve in Spencer, Oklahoma back in the 80s. The water heater blew up and took a wall out in a school. And these are the names of the children that died, and one teacher died when the wall came in on top of them. So you can actually Google it and go to Spencer, Oklahoma, and still find information about this. But again, I don't want to minimize the importance of it. You got to remember this is like super important when you're inspecting, doing your regular inspection. Make sure you're looking at the TPR valve. Don't just kind of run by it. Take a second, look at it, and make sure that it's installed properly. And I'll go over some of the basic stuff here real quick. The vent pipe, some people call it the blow-off tube, whatever you want to call it, the discharge pipe. It should not be directly connected to the drainage system. In other words, don't pipe that thing into a plumbing pipe, a drain pipe. First of all, that's a cross connection. And so because you got domestic water now connected to, the potable water now is connected to the drain water, and there's always the potential for back siphoning. Also, in some circumstances, if this thing cut loose, you wouldn't want to be near the plumbing. If it blew a hit of steam through there, it could cause some damage that way. It needs to discharge through an air gap located in the same room as the water heater. That's just one of your options. But basically what they're wanting is don't turn this thing down into a floor drain. It needs an air gap. It needs to be above the floor drain. If you're gonna let it discharge into maybe a mop sink or something like that, uh, a mud sink in a maybe a garage, or a mud sink maybe in a basement or something like that. It really should not be in the sink. It should be above the sink.
So Kenny, we got a quick question here about if a TPR valve discharges, does it reset itself automatically? I know that I was
yes. If it's spring loaded, so it'll go back into the position, the normal position. The pressure seems to be obvious. You kind of realize pressure goes up in there, it lifts the stem and it relieves. What's a little confusing is the white stem that you're seeing there. That actually has a material in it. When it gets hot, it expands and it basically pushes that stem up and allows it to relieve. It'll reset in most cases, but I will tell you, a lot of times, just by even lifting the lever periodically, checking it from time to time, they won't seal back completely. A lot of us are telling our clients, you should flush this off once a year or whatever. I tell you, as a plumber, I've never flushed one off. I would always just go there and change it. If I go there, lift the lever, and I stand there with it for a few minutes and it drips, I'm not sure it's ever going to cut off, because they do have a little, an area where you could get scale in it and all kinds of debris and stuff, and it just won't shut off properly. And then now you're worried about it causing something to get damaged with the water. So I always, as a plumber, I always just changed it. If people wanted to do that, I just show up at the house. It didn't cost them any more for me to flush it, other than the cost of the device itself, and they're not terribly expensive. The pipe should not be, that blow-off pipe should never be smaller than the diameter of the device. Basically, it's a 3/4 inch opening in most of these things. You want a 3/4 inch pipe. There is an exception to that, and that's it's actually down at off to the side under the pictures. It says PEX increased to 1 inch. I think it was a code cycle ago, maybe 2 cycles ago. What they started telling us is put a 3/4 by 1 inch adapter in there, and the pipe itself should be 1 inch PEX if you're going to use PEX. Now, there's other things to worry about when you're using PEX, like you can't have dips in the tubing because that's trapping it. It's got to be well secured and sloped, so all the other rules still apply. But if you're going to run a piece of PEX down, maybe to the floor or something like that, it needs to be bumped up to 1 inch, because by the time you insert a fitting in it and all that, you've really kind of cut it down to, it's not much bigger than an opening of a 1/2 inch pipe by the time you do all that. So that's the rule, is to do, to go ahead and bump it up to 1 inch at the start. It should serve a single device. In other words, don't tie a whole bunch of relief valves together. Multi-family housing and something like that. You'll go into a utility room and realize they've kind of built a manifold and they've got all these together. They're not supposed to be tied together. You're supposed to be able to look at them, tell which one is disconnected. And it also says it shouldn't be connected to any other relief device or equipment. In other words, don't tie it into something else, maybe like a condensate drain. Shouldn't be tied into a condensate drain. It needs to be independent. It needs to go and relieve on its own. It should discharge to the floor and indirect waste, or to the outdoors. Now, where I live here in Virginia, we can discharge them to the outdoors. We don't tend to have freezing, but from time to time we might. If you're living in a colder climate, then you're probably also living in an area where you have a basement. So you might be relieving it in a sink or something in the basement, whatever, that's fine. But it says indirect waste. That confuses people sometimes. An indirect waste, the best example of an indirect waste would be the pan. If you want to sit this in a pan, you can run it down to the pan, get it above the pan and let it discharge in the pan. And that's an indirect waste as long as the pan is piped out. If you worry about freezing, you may even be able to discharge it in the pan where the pipe goes outside, and where you're worried about it freezing, that worry goes away, because now it still at least blow off in the pan. And even if the pipe to the outdoors is frozen on the pan, you're still not really putting yourself in danger of an explosion or something like that. It shouldn't discharge in a manner that'll cause personal injury or structural damage. I think the two things for that would be, a lot of them you see, they don't have a blow off tube on it at all. They don't have anything on there, so it could cut loose and smack somebody upside the head. You never really know how these things are going to blow. Sometimes they just kind of come on and slowly trickle till they come up to a full blown pour. Sometimes they cut loose automatically. You're not really sure how they're going to do it, but you don't want to be standing next to one when that happens. So, make sure it's pointing in a direction. It's not going to hurt anybody. And it's structural damage. Probably the first thing that comes to mind on that would be if it's in an attic, you want to make sure it's piped to a safe location, maybe to the pan, and pipe the pan out would be a good way to do that. But just, even inside a house, a lot of times I'll look and somebody says, well, it's a slab. They can let it go down to the floor. And I would tell people, because a lot of times they got furniture and all this stuff nearby. If it leaks on the floor while they're going, it could cause all kinds of problems. And I try to bring it to their attention. If it's in the event of a discharge, it's going to cause a lot of damage. I just bring it to their attention. Discharge to a termination point readily observable. I mentioned that a while ago. Crawl space is not readily observable. I know when I installed these, they always were at the foundation somewhere through the blocks or through the brick skirting or whatever. And I like to get it near like the front door or something, so that when you're walking into your house, if it's dripping water or pouring water, you're aware that you got a problem. But it should be something that's readily observable. You don't want it wrapped up in vines and things like that, so you can't see it. It should not be trapped, and we're not talking about a plumbing trap. We're talking about the pipe essentially backsloping or having dips in it. That's really a trap when you create that. A few years ago, they started putting the TPR valves on the side of the heaters, where they at one time were on the top. A lot of guys were turning the TPR valve straight up, piping up and across the top of the heater to the existing pipe in the wall. Well, that's trapping it, and you can't do that. It's got to be able to drain or flow by gravity. It says right here, flow by gravity. So imagine if it's a little bit of water coming in, and if that water could continually to roll out, it should at some point drain out in the yard over a sink or wherever you're draining it, a floor drain or whatever. It should not terminate more than 6 inches above the floor. I think the biggest mistake I used to see in that would be people would have them on a platform. They would put them on a platform because they were worried about the flammable vapors and so forth, and they would run it down to the platform, not to the floor. So it'd be 18, 20 inches off of the floor. So get it down around 6 inches, or no more than 6 inches off the floor is where you want to go. No threaded connections at the end of the pipe. That always confuses people. A lot of times when the do-it-yourselfer will put it in, he'll go out and get a threaded piece of pipe from Home Depot or someplace like that. If you see this pipe dripping in your house, you have a tendency to want to stop the water. If you got a threaded pipe connection, somebody will screw a cap on it. So you've got to get rid of the threaded connections, or make sure there's nothing on there that somebody can easily plug up. No valves or T fittings. In other words, don't tie a T in there and connect other things to it. No valve. I had a guy one time, he put a valve on his, and I said, why are you doing that? He said, well, if it blew off, I wanted to be able to shut it and stop the damage, while I was waiting to replace it. No, you don't put anything in the way that you're likely to accidentally shut off. There's nothing supposed to be in that pipe. No valves anywhere. The material, I get asked about this a lot. The material generally under this list is going to be hot water rated pipe. If the pipe can handle hot water, typically it's going to be fine. Most areas are not going to allow PVC, but they will allow CPVC to vent it. PEX, some areas will allow
PEX. Kenny, if they use PEX, that stuff's pretty flexible. Does it have to be strapped in place or something?
The problem with PVC is not ready for that high temperature. CPVC is, and anytime it's in a position where it could move around or something like that, yeah, because that falls back on the safe location. situation. It's safe discharge. It's got to be able to be solid. They make a little old flexible thing that you can buy at the hardware store and screw on there. And I mean, it's flimsy. But if you look at it, when you buy it, it comes with a strap. And you put the strap down at the bottom and put a little screw into the side of the jacket and hold that thing into place. So absolutely, if it's going to flop around and hit somebody, that's a major problem. It's got to be.
Kenny, you know what? Somebody just made a comment here about you're saying don't put threads on the end of it, but some of these new fittings now don't require threads, like the push on PEX valves.
Well, that would be something that what's going to happen is somebody's going to do, like you said, probably a shark bite or something like that. And then it's going to fall back. They're going to have to come up with a way to prevent that, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, people, will find a way to screw it up. It's unfortunate, but that is kind of what happens. There is one other question I get all the time. How many elbows can you use? Most of the elbow restrictions are actually on the device. I think Watts has a yellow tag on theirs. I'm pretty sure it's Watts. Might be Cash Acme, but anyway, it just says 4 elbows. You can't put more than 4 elbows on there, and it actually says more than 30 feet of pipe. So if you're looking at it and it's got a whole bunch of elbows to get there, sometimes the question is, did they have to use that many elbows? If they didn't, but they just did it, then they should be able to eliminate some elbows and get it down to a safe number. But if they can't, because from time to time I'll see something and I realize there was no way to really get there. The way to get around that is just to increase the size of the pipe. So if you increase it to 1 inch, the elbow rule is not going to be as big a deal because that pipe is now going to be able to handle much more volume if it does blow off or something like that. And again, you could do an indirect waste or something like that. You could have it venting, just discharging down on an open pipe or something that runs to the outdoors. But what they don't want is a whole bunch of turns that create restrictions and cause back pressure on the thing. So that's their main concern. But any questions, Hollis?
Well, how about galvanized steel and black iron? They're allowed.
Some areas won't allow it. Here's my thought with that. In order for that to rust, to really clog up rusting or something like that, you're probably going to be leaking water all the time, and hopefully you'd have enough sense to deal with that. I don't get excited when I see a galvanized steel nipple because they'll go to Home Depot, they'll buy it. But if I see the galvanized nipple extended down to the floor and they cut the threads off, I personally don't care. And in Virginia, what we have to do is we're not allowed to, cite code. We have to explain what the concern is. And the intent of the code, basically. They restrict us from even mentioning code in Virginia. So, that particular thing, I personally wouldn't be that concerned with it. But again, if it looks like it's been, dripping and it's rusting and things like that, there's obviously concern. They don't specifically get into it here. This was the what was it? That's a while back, 2006, I think it was. Yeah, 2006 edition, and it's pretty much stayed the same except for the PEX thing. When somebody mentioned the shark bites earlier, that might happen. Shark bite you can get a shark bite to go on. Well, CPVC, PEX, and copper are all the same size on the outside, so they could buy it, snap it on there, and it'd be done. And I don't know that it would blow off. I mean, they hold a lot of pressure. I mean, they're rated at like 200 pounds of pressure, and the relief valve is supposed to cut loose at 150. So it probably would not, fall off. But just stress the importance of things like that to your client. I know that thing is just kind of sitting there, and we kind of fly by it, but it's super, super important. Like I said, when I do the research for some of this stuff, I find so many cases of people getting hurt, walls coming down, holes in ceilings. I remember reading one, and it said it rocketed from the Pizza Hut across the street and landed in the Taco Bell parking lot. And I thought, can you imagine driving down the road and you see the water heater flying through the air and then landing in another parking lot? So there's a lot of damage there. TPR valves generally don't blow off because it has high pressure. TPR valves almost always blow off because of the high temperature. The tank is under pressure, the water overheats, and now we got superheated water in there. And as soon as that water begins to escape through a crack or a hole or whatever, and it hits the atmosphere, that water could be, 280 degrees, 300 degrees or whatever, because it was under pressure. But as soon as it hits the atmosphere, it's going to hit the, 212 degrees is where it's generally going to go to steam. So we're going to have a steam explosion, basically, is what we have there. So when people say they're, well, they had too much pressure on it, blew up, it's usually too much temperature. And in most cases, it's usually too much temperature. So keep that in mind that, that's likely what's going to happen if somebody, has one fail. Remember, the water heaters have high limit switches on them. That's actually the first safety device to cut it off before it gets to the blow off point. So, we realize that is an issue, but, it happens. And, it's just important to take a look at them. You see an old TPR valve on something that's been on there for 15 years or something like that. I'm going to mention it to them, because every one I've ever pulled out that had any age on it, it was crusted up and sealed up pretty bad. Stanley, who's going to speak in a few minutes, he mentioned to me earlier today that he pulled one out. I think it was out of his own heater, and he says he was going to bring it into the class because it was a really good example of how one gets scaled up and crusted up and things like that. So, he's going to bring it in here so people can actually see one. I've pulled them out 5 or 6 years old, and they were a mess.
All right. Well, speaking of Stanley, Stanley, have you got your PowerPoint up ready to go? Kenny, thanks a whole lot.
Okay.
You all bring something.
Hey, Kenny, can I ask you one quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Did a home inspection yesterday, pulled the panel off the wall. It had red packs going to the hot and the cold side of a fixture for the shower. Is that a defect or just something to let them know? It wasn't set of red and blue for hot and cold. It was packs and both pipes were red for hot and cold.
Not properly color coded.
Was it? Oh, was it a single handle faucet?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, single handle faucets, you're supposed to use the scale, for turning them off. You're supposed to follow the scale. If somebody's got, 2 reds on there, some people might be, not understand. I hate to have to say it, but we got some people that are just, they're not that bright.
I know, they're all my customers. Thank you.
But hot on the left, cold on the right is the standard. I've had people call me back before after putting in a faucet saying you did the water wrong, and I would go back and I would say, no, it's fine. And they would say, no, it used to be the other way. I want it that way. As a plumber, I would tell them, no, you can't have it that way.
Well, I know the white and clear is neutral either way, but the red blue thing is like, so I Googled it. They said that PEX, they do that for information. So, for visual.
Yeah, well, when you read the code, it basically says, you follow the direction of the device. It'll have something, an arrow, a C and an H or whatever. Whereas as you walk up to a 2-handle faucet in the dark, you put your hand on it, left on the left should be hot, the right should be cold. Right. And, it's not overwhelmingly a concern when it is actually right, even though they got the red dots on there. But, I would at least bring it to their attention.
Yeah, I did.
But it's, as far as a safety issue, they can turn on the cold, it's going to be cold. Just because the dot's red